All right, let's just jump right in. Think about your day so far. Chances are you've already eaten something ultra processed. I'm talking breakfast cereals, maybe some bacon, frozen dinners for later. These foods are absolutely everywhere. And look, they're designed for convenience, a super long shelf life, and let's be real, to taste incredible. But we're starting to realize there's a hidden cost. So the big question is just how bad are they really?
To really wrap your head around the scale of this, just look at this number. It's wild. Researchers looked at over 200,000 food products in the US, and they found that a staggering 71% of them were ultra-processed. This isn't some small corner of the grocery store, you know? This is pretty much the main event in our food supply.
So, what are we even talking about when we say ultra processed? Well, the official definition sounds kind of complicated, but it basically boils down to this. These aren't really foods in the way we usually think of them. They're industrial creations, right? Engineered from substances pulled out of foods, and then they've got this long list of additives to make them look, feel, and taste like something you would want to eat. Think about a Twinkie or a chicken nugget. Now, we all kind of have that gut feeling that, these foods aren't exactly health foods, right? And for the most part, that intuition is totally spot on. There are some really obvious risks we've actually known about for a long, long time.
I mean, this is pretty much Nutrition 101. We all know that the insane amount of sugar in a lot of these products is linked to cavities. The high salt can lead to high blood pressure. And of course, they're often packed with calories, which, contributes to obesity. They're also deliberately engineered to be hyperpalatable. That's a fancy term for being so delicious you literally can't stop eating them. It triggers something called hedonic eating, where you're eating for pleasure, not because you're actually hungry.
Okay, but this is where the plot really thickens. If the problem were just about sugar, salt, and fat, the fix would be easy, right? Companies could just tweak the formula. But study after study keeps linking these foods to a whole bunch of other really serious issues, like a higher risk for dementia, for certain cancers, and even depression. So what's really going on here? Is there something deeper at play than just what's on the nutrition label? And that right there, that leads us to the heart of the matter. It's the central question scientists have been trying to answer. Is the problem just that these foods are, junk? Or is there something about the industrial processing itself that's doing the harm, totally separate from the nutrients?
So, to finally get an answer, researchers designed this absolutely landmark study, the first ever randomized controlled trial to really isolate the effects of the ultra-processing. And this is the gold standard in science, right? It's designed to figure out cause and effect, once and for all. So how they do it? This is where the experiment gets so clever. They had 20 volunteers live in a lab, and for 2 weeks they ate an ultra-processed diet. Then, for another 2 weeks, they ate an unprocessed diet. But and you have to get this, this is the key part, the meals were perfectly matched. Same amount of calories, sugar, fat, fiber, carbs, everything. That meant they could finally see what the processing itself was doing. And the results? They were absolutely mind-blowing. When people were on the ultra-processed diet, they were told, hey, eat as much or as little as you want. And on their own, with nobody telling them to, they just spontaneously started eating about 500 extra calories a day compared to when they were on the whole foods diet. 500? And what did those 500 extra calories a day actually do? Well, in just 2 weeks on the ultra-processed diet, the participants gained about 2 pounds. But get this, on the unprocessed diet, they lost 2 pounds. This was a huge deal. It proved the issue isn't just the nutrients. There's something in the nature of the food itself that's driving us to overeat and gain weight. Okay, so it seems pretty open and shut, right? Ultra-processing is the bad guy. But it actually gets a little more complicated. Because when scientists dig deeper into the data from these huge population studies, they find that not all ultra-processed foods are created equal. Not at all. In fact, it turns out that a massive chunk of the harm can be traced back to just 2 main culprits: sugary drinks and processed meats. Now, this is a really powerful piece of information because it takes this giant, overwhelming problem and makes it feel a lot more manageable. If we just target these 2 things, we can make a huge difference. And then there's this total curveball. There was one category of ultra-processed food that was actually linked to better health outcomes: plant-based fake meats, like an Impossible Burger. They were found to be way better for you than the animal meats they're supposed to replace. So even though they're definitely ultra-processed, they're a huge step in the right direction. It just goes to show you, processing itself isn't necessarily evil. It's all about how you use it. So let's zoom in on one of those main culprits, processed meats. You have absolutely seen this label on a package of so-called natural bacon or hot dogs. It's in big, bold letters, right? Designed to make you feel great about buying it. But there's almost always that little asterisk. And that little asterisk leads you to this fine print. So here's the trick. To avoid putting sodium nitrite on the ingredients list, companies use celery powder, which is naturally high in nitrates. Then they add a bacteria culture that turns those nitrates into nitrites right there in the package. So yeah, they're adding nitrates just through a sneaky back door. And when Consumer Reports tested these products, they found the nitrite levels were basically the exact same as in regular old cured meats. Okay, wow, that was a lot to take in. We've looked at the scale of the problem, the groundbreaking science, and some of these really surprising details. So let's bring it all home. Let's make this practical. Based on everything we've just learned, what are 2 simple changes you could actually try making this week? So here it is, a simple plan, straight from the science. First, one thing to cut back on, processed meats. The World Health Organization classifies things like bacon, ham, and sausage as Group 1 carcinogens. You know what else is in that category? Tobacco smoke and asbestos. So yeah, cutting back on that is a no-brainer. Second, one swap to try, a plant-based burger. Just like the data showed us, even though it's ultra-processed, it's a huge health upgrade from a regular beef burger.
So the whole point here is that we don't have to be perfect. The science gives us really clear targets for making smarter choices. It's all about reducing the absolute worst offenders and trying out some of the better alternatives when we can. And that really just leaves one final question for you to think about. What's one simple swap you're willing to try this week?